Hi, and welcome to Lesson 1 of the Is Communication Strategery for Real, the Strategic Communications course of the 2019 Spring Nonprofit Bootcamp e-learning series. Having an effective communication strategy for your organization is one of the most powerful tools for building community support and increasing organizational impact. This course will discuss why strategic communication matters, how to tell your story, and how to know that your communications efforts are making an impact. Today's presenters are Brad Cameron Cooper and Lori Ducey. Brad is the founder of Big Box, a communications firm that empowers social entrepreneurs to harness the power of their stories to transform lives and communities. He is a strategic storyteller and experienced communications expert, and is joined in this course by co-trainer Lori Ducey, a nonprofit consultant who helps organizations tell their story, uncover opportunities, and spark positive change. She's an experienced project manager and communications expert, and we are grateful to have both of them on board to deliver this course. With that, I'll hand it over to our trainers.
Hello everyone, and we're so glad to have you joining us today for his Communication Strategery for Real. As Annalena mentioned, my name is Brad Cameron Cooper, and I love strategic communication so much that I started Big Box, a communication firm that helps social entrepreneurs, folks like you, to harness the power of your stories to transform lives and communities. And I define social entrepreneurs as people who creatively destroy what doesn't work to make life better for more people. And with that, I'll let Lori introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lori Ducey, and for many years I've been helping folks like you bring ideas to life through actionable plans, M&E frameworks, and generally creating roadmaps to success. And before we dive in, I'd like to thank the Wallace Center at Windrock International for giving us the opportunity to work with y'all. We're really excited to be here with you. If you had a chance to see our pre-video, we included a little 6-word story exercise. And if you had a chance to do that, we'll try to give you an opportunity to share it during the office hours. And for those of you who didn't get a chance to see the video, take a look at it. The Hemingway's 6-word exercise can be really helpful and a fun way to engage your teams in succinctly thinking about messaging. As we go along, please think about questions and insights you might like to share. And then, so Brad and I designed Is Communication Strategery for Real to help you really become rock star communication strategists. Wherever you sit in the food system spectrum, and no matter if that's only for a couple of months or a couple of decades, we hope by the end of our time together, you will feel more confident about helping your organization share its messages, its stories of progress about the communities and the people you serve. So after today, also in the next 2 sessions, you'll have a clearer understanding to craft the right message that could compel your audience to donate, grow your volunteer base, build advocates to help you share your stories and messages, and share skills and knowledge. And then, of course, be able to assess how well you're doing so your teams can learn and continuously improve. So you'll be able to explain how general communication and strategic communication are different. You'll also be able to lay out for your colleagues and your various organizations why storytelling is a great vehicle for strategic communication. We'll get you to this higher level of knowledge by sharing what strategic communication is and how storytelling can be used as an effective strategy. And then we'll take a couple of steps towards strategic communication planning, because it all starts with understanding what strategic communication is and then making a plan. So let's just kind of jump right in. The textbook definition of communication is, of course, a process by which information is exchanged between individuals. In other words, when words and body language or images are shared, that's communication. And we communicate all the time. By the the line between general communication and strategic communication is how intentional we are about our communication, whether we've thought about why, who, when, where, and the how, of course. But strategic communication is communication. It just goes deeper. It's purposeful and goal-driven, meaning there's a motive for doing it. It relays a concept, a process, data, facts. There's information that you're giving folks aligned with your purpose and goals. It's integrated internally and externally. It includes what folks inside your organization need to know to do their jobs effectively, as well as what your folks outside your organization need to know to help you achieve your purpose and goals. It engages people. You're connecting with folks to like grow your base or retain support in some way, or just share information. It's planned. When you know when, you'll know how to do it and why. So it's planned. It achieves a desired effect based on your goals and your plan. You can keep track of things as you're doing it. And I want to emphasize a key point that many folks often forget because they're always externally focused. But strategic communication is internal and external. Of course, we craft messages for various audiences, such as clients and donors and funders. But it's just as important for your teams, your coworkers, and your volunteers to know your organization's message, why that message, and to achieve what end. Your teams need to see where they fit into their strategic communication plan. In short, strategic communication helps drive progress toward our organization's mission and goals, and it is laser focused on compelling audiences, whomever that audience is defined to be, to take relevant action. It can be measured and evaluated so your organizations are learning and improving. So strategic communication kind of has a recipe, if you will. Excuse our little graphic, it looks like it's off just a little bit, which we're not doing our strategic communication well, are we? So the little funnel that you see holds the elements that make up communication. A messenger gets things started with a message, an idea they want to share, then they craft that message to an identified audience who they want to receive their message. Then they find the right channel, how they want to communicate and connect their messages to their audience. And then, of course, that all means you're communicating. In the context of strategic communication, it's best to think about each of these elements based on what your organization has set out to achieve, and the context of the available resources, which of course includes your time, the expertise, and the funding, and who you're trying to reach. If you need to increase the number of volunteers, for example, to run some farm programs, your best bet may be college-age students, as they likely have a bit more time and want to be able to have that experience in learning, more so than, the white-collar folks in their 30s and 40s and up. You craft your message that fits that audience. Knowing how to reach that particular audience, like the college-age students, they spend a lot of time on social media, so that would be your vehicle with your message to go out to them. On the other hand, if you're trying to increase donations, you may want to target your message towards professionals in their 30s, 40s, and 50s plus. They're more likely to have disposable income compared to the younger age college folks. You craft your message for that target audience, and then you select your forms of communication, let's say an online appeal, to get them to donate to a specific program or just generally to your cause. When focusing on your capacity to do all this, just remember, you need to think about time, the expertise, the funding, And then narrowing it down, remember that strategic communication helps you drive towards your goals, your mission, progress toward those metrics. And then it's laser focused, and it can be measured and evaluated to continuously learn. And once again, I cannot emphasize this enough, is that your internal audience, your foot soldiers for driving the work forward, is just as important as your external audience in many ways. Folks at your organization if they're not on the same page, it can be difficult for organizations to really see their success in their messaging and their sharing in their campaigns and what they're trying to do. It can be overwhelming to try to communicate and market what you do. We know this working in the food systems area, but defining what you're trying to communicate, to whom and how, through those various channels of communication, can make strategic communication less overwhelming. And just an aside, I'm looking forward to jumping into some tools next week, especially that will help you make your strategic communication simpler and effective, and start making a plan. So we'll look at that next week. And then, but the last thing that I would like to cover before Brad takes over is, excuse me, are just generally an overview of the channels of communication, how you're sharing your ideas, your messaging through the many forms that are available. So just briefly, speeches are when messengers verbally share ideas. You know, you think about a political candidate on a campaign trail, or a volunteer manager prepping a big group of volunteers for the big fundraising event, or an agriculture expert sharing new research with professionals in their area of expertise. Then you have, to the right of that, you have print media. It's, you know, of course, written words and images. Examples would be annual reports, research reports, articles, things like that. And we say print loosely because we do mean print, but we also know a lot of that stuff is nowadays electronic, but it's that idea of a print piece. And then websites are, of course, how ideas are often shared across the internet. Your organization and maybe your partners may have a website that includes information that's useful, or key messages to increase donations or grow a base of volunteers. Some organizations also create websites for initiatives to do a deeper dive on a topic. And then at the very bottom is social media. We all know this has really exploded in the last decade, and it consists of a network. It's people, organizations, even robots for that matter. But the examples, of course, are Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and Snapchat. And then we move on to videos, which combine those audio and images to really give a visual for your ideas and the information you're trying to share. Although some organizations invest in big budget videos and documentaries, all sizes of organizations can communicate with short videos, clips of videos, recorded on smartphones even, and used across various channels to achieve their goals. And then the last one would be the earned media, when journalists are notified about an event or a topic that they consider newsworthy, and often sharing a press release or contacting them directly is helpful. And then paid media occurs when an organization pays a news source to share information through various forms, ads, things like that. While your organization may not use all of these channels in a strategic communication plan, it's helpful to see them in a simple visual so you can think creatively about how to use them individually or in combination to reach your organization's goals. Okay, I am going to turn it over to Brad now, and he's going to talk about a specific strategic tool. And thank you.
Awesome, and thank you so much, Lori. And what a great overview of the nuts and bolts of not just communication, but doing a little deeper dive into what strategic communication really is. And now we're going to switch gears a little bit into a topic I'm extraordinarily excited about, and that's storytelling. And I'm so excited about storytelling because from teaching our children to the latest Avengers movie, we're actually surrounded by stories every day. They're how we learn, build communities, and in the case of the latest Avengers movie, how some people make a lot of money. But what makes a good story is pretty straightforward. Whether it's, again, teaching your kids to a box office blockbuster, here are just the kind of the nuts and bolts of storytelling. Stories are made of people, relatable people who aren't perfect but are doing their best to achieve something. A great example is The Wizard of Oz. I'm sure pretty much probably everybody on this call has seen The Wizard of Oz at least probably 3 times. A relatable character in The Wizard of Oz is Dorothy, and she craves adventure. And over the course of the film, her terror, when she's swooped up by a tornado, turns to delight, and everything goes from black and white to this Technicolor wonderland. And then delight turns to duty as she is given one objective after another. She faces her greatest challenge yet, the Wicked Witch of the West, overcomes the foe, and she's rewarded with a journey home, which she sees in a brave new light. So, as I mentioned, stories are made up of people. And just as these people are relatable, characters in stories also need to be interesting. How interesting would Dorothy's story be if she landed in Oz, put 2 and 2 together about the ruby slippers, and went straight back home? Be a snooze fest, or at least some of us would feel like it's a waste of time. What makes her interesting is she faced challenges, expressed fear, and overcame her own internal struggles just as much as she defeated the foe. So, as I mentioned, characters need to be interesting. Good storytelling means something to the people experiencing the story as well. So you have a relatable person who's interesting and people can connect with. So good storytelling means something to the people experiencing the story. In The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's story is so compelling because we've all been bored, scared, and felt pride at some point in our lives. So it's a shared experience with the main character. Also, the best stories feel like they could happen. And I promise that this applies to The Wizard of Oz, as fanciful as it may seem. But if you don't believe me, just remember watching Dorothy triumph with a 5-year-old. I do, with my 5-year-old brother. And there was no way that I could tell my 5-year-old brother that what was happening on screen couldn't actually happen in real life. That's because the sequence of events was logical, and what happened built a world we could imagine ourselves inhabiting. Even if it couldn't technically happen, it's important to help your audience believe, or at least want it to be feasible. And in the case of our organizations, the stories we tell should be a stage for the families and communities we serve. We shouldn't be front and center. It is the people that we're serving ultimately who we're lifting up. Our organizations aren't heroes, but they create the space where heroic deeds can be recognized, shared, and celebrated. Now, as we all know, affecting change in food systems is complex and often challenging. It has been difficult to simply define what constitutes a food system to begin with, and the graphic on the left shows the complexities. But for those of us who work in food systems, it all boils down to the smallest exchanges, like the photo on the right, that have a big impact. Supply chain analyses and the charts we put together to understand them are useful to decision makers at our organizations. But to potential donors, volunteers, and advocates, they're a total snooze fest. But the little girl who finds someone to look up to and befriend because the farmer's market our organization helps make possible, now that's a story that melts hearts and builds bases of support. The picture on the left is what many of us are used to. The picture on the right reflects the stories we want to help you learn to tell. Also, keep in mind that there are some areas where storytelling is a cross-cutting strategy. Before you start planning your organization's strategic communication, you have all of these elements to consider. So keep in mind the following questions. Why are you sharing your story in the first place? Who is your audience? Whose heart will your storytelling speak to? What information are you trying to share with your audience? And what do you want folks experiencing your stories to do differently, and when? Now, whatever channels you choose, also consider, how does your story make your audience feel? As you'll see in the picture labeled Convey Emotion, that's there to reflect the fact that emotions are powerful and they often motivate people to do something. Next, how are you helping your audience connect with the characters in your story? People want to support and even celebrate folks they feel connected to. And if they don't feel connected to them, they're more likely to just ignore the story outright. And then, what can your audience learn? One of the best ways people learn is by reliving and engaging characters' relatable experiences. Emotion, empathy, and knowledge connect us all, and research shows these three aspects of stories help organizations achieve their goals despite differences in age and lifestyle among intended audience members. Used well, good stories can help you increase your pool of donors, grow your volunteer base, and ultimately build advocates for achieving your organization's mission and goals. So be sure to check out the examples mentioned in the pre-video that we shared before the series began, as well as the ones listed in the resource page we've provided. And as you're looking through them, kind of think about what makes these examples really stand out, and what can you learn and apply to your organization's strategic communication moving forward. So let's look through some guidelines about that make good storytelling. Whatever channels you use, remember that authenticity is incredibly important. People are moved when they feel connected, but it has to feel real. Again, going back to our Wizard of Oz example, it has to feel logical, plausible, realistic, and relatable. Next, approach the people you serve with an open heart and help them tell their own stories through your organization. Listen to them, their stories, and ideas. You don't want to hijack somebody else's story, because how authentic would that be? Also, get on the same level as your organization's audience. The best storytellers start by observing, listening, and reflecting on what they're learning about the folks they're trying to communicate to. So, just as it's important to speak in communication, it's just as important to listen. And be clear on why your organization is sharing stories in the first place. Folks don't typically trust people who try to hide what they're trying to do, and it's the same for building relationships between your organization, communities, for growing volunteer base, donors, as well as advocates for achieving your mission and goals. And let others' stories be the star. And you need to be ready to capture the things that make the story come alive. That's the emotion, that's the setting and the context, that's the logical progression of events that help your heroes overcome foes and obstacles and challenges to really become, the hero of the story. And the best way to pull folks in is by playing to their emotions. You want folks to laugh, cry, maybe even possibly feel angry, especially around advocacy work. And with the right elements, which I've mentioned just now, the story can be the star. And through the story, your work can be recognized. And we'll close today out with a few thoughts and a bit of a preview of what we'll be discussing next. And I want to just take a moment to look at this cartoon that I absolutely love, because we've probably all been in situations where we're putting plans together, plans for action, and you get to a point where maybe you don't have enough information and you kind of want to take a shortcut and just expect a miracle to happen. So in this cartoon, it's kind of how I think the world should work, or at least how I want it to work. A scientist has taken some shortcuts. Has all this complex math, and in the very center, connecting the very beginning to the very end is just when a miracle occurs. We can't expect miracles to happen in our work, and that's why planning is absolutely important. Why next week we'll be doing a deeper dive into planning and giving, again, as Lori mentioned earlier, practical tools that you can use based on your skill level and the time, staff, and expertise, time, staff, resources, and expertise you have at your disposal. So again, this is a bit of a preview of what we'll be talking about next week, and we'll start with SMART goals. SMART goals are really useful, a very useful first step in strategic communication planning. SMART strategic communication goals are, as you can see, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So take a minute between now and our next session on May 9th to identify and write down some SMART goals for your organization's strategic communication to help your organization achieve, in the next 6 months to a year. So in summary, Lori and I have set our own SMART goals for today's session. We hope that if we asked anyone on this call the difference between general communication and strategic communication, you'd be able to immediately tell us. We also hope we could ask you why strategic communication matters, how your organization could use storytelling, and what makes for a good story. And although we haven't fully explored strategic communication planning yet, you've been assigned a fundamental first step in strategic communication planning, which is to identify SMART goals for your organization. And as we look ahead, keep in mind that we've tried to ensure these sessions build on each other. What we've discussed today, we at least intend, feeds into sessions 2 and 3. Our next session will be May 9th, and we're excited to jump into strategic communication planning. And please come prepared with those written strategic communication SMART goals. We can't wait to talk with you then. Now, let's jump into office hours.